This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We talked last week about GDP growth, you know, how the Trump administration is talking about how they want to get GDP growth above 3% going forward. It has not been above 3% for the average of a presidency since the Reagan presidency. It was at 6.3% through the 15 years of the Roosevelt-Truman administration. It was 6.1% average per year during Truman's administration. Dwight Eisenhower had a terrible recession for a couple of years, and if you backed that out, it would be in the 4.5% range. If you include that, it was a little over 3% that Eisenhower had. Kennedy and Johnson, 1961 to 64, 4.73%. LBJ, 5.18%. But then, you know, after Reagan, who had a 3.5% growth, but in the next to the last year of his presidency, dropped the top tax rate from 74% down to 25%. No president since then has hit 3%. Bush 41 was 2.28%. Clinton was 3.88%, but Clinton raised taxes on rich people. Bush 43 was 2.1%. Obama 1.48%, of course, coming out of a terrible recession. But the advantages of that top 90% tax rate that we had prior to the Harding administration and prior to the Reagan administration, what it does is it gets rid of the quick buck scheme business model. It forces long-term thinking and planning for companies instead of short-term scheming. You know, when it takes owners and executives years to build a fortune, they need solid companies that are around for a long time, writes Dave Johnson in the blog over at Huffington Post. It lowers the executive crime rate. It would start paying off the massive Reagan-Bush debt. It would bring in revenue to pay for infrastructure. It recirculates money in the economy more productively than the current system of putting huge fortunes in a few hands and hoping for, you know, high-end goods consumption. It protects working people. The era of extreme union busting came at the same time as the tax cuts. It reduces the concentration of wealth at the very top. It fights, thus, the political instability that results from that concentration of wealth. You know, last year, 25 hedge fund managers brought in an average $1 billion each in income, an amount that would have paid for 658,000 people. If they had been taxed at 90%, they would have taken home $100 million each. They'd still be mind-bogglingly rich in a single year, and we could have had 658,000 new teachers. It seems like a win-win to me. Why not do this? It worked for the United States. The periods of our greatest growth were at the times that we had a 91% top income tax rate. On the line with us is Ryan Girdusky, senior writer with Red Alert Politics, redalertpolitics.com. You can tweet him at Ryan Girdusky, Girdusky, or at Red Alert. Hey, Ryan, welcome.
Hey, Tom, it's been a while. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, good talking to you. So, you know, all of the evidence is clear that when you have a top tax rate that's above 50%, and this is the stuff that Thomas Piketty wrote an entire book about that kind of took the economic world by storm, that when the top tax rate is above 50%, it stabilizes the economy and it builds a middle class. And when the top tax rate is below 50%, it destabilizes the economy and rips wealth from the middle class and hands it to the top 1%. Why is it not a conservative thing? I mean, to have a top tax rate of 90%. Dwight Eisenhower defended it. Richard Nixon defended it. You know, Barry Goldwater defended it. Everybody understood that this is a good thing until Reagan came along with a bunch of billionaire backing, and the billionaires were like, hey, we're greedy. We want more.
Well, I'm not sure about Barry Goldwater, but yes, Richard Nixon defended him. JFK actually attacked him for it during their televised debate. During the 1950s, when the marginal tax rate was 91%, there were 24 different tax brackets and various loopholes to prevent people from actually paying the 91%. Very, very few people really paid it. One of the most famous examples was Johnny Carson, who earned lots of money in The Tonight Show in 1962, 1963, right after the Kennedy tax deduction, which was still very, very high at the time. And they would have, they would put your income, they would spread your income over several years. So you'd have people earning lots of money and their income would be continual for years even after their work had ended. There was also several tax loopholes or sorry, not tax loopholes, but work incentivized compensation, where rather than getting paid bonuses because you'd be pushed into a higher income tax bracket, people were getting health insurance, which is why we have employer-based health insurance in this country, is because of that system, the 1940s and 50s that it created. And also, it wasn't. You're taking correlations and making it causation. Certainly, a 91% income tax bracket did not cause a boom in the 1950s. The fact that we were the only developed nation in the world at that time that wasn't bombed out from World War II certainly helped create a higher.
Actually, our exports were fairly small. You know, the whole thing of the Marshall Plan was not to sell products to other countries, but rather to give them money and let them build their own factories. That's how we rebuilt Germany. Our exports went from whoa, hang on just a second. My computer just went nuts on me. Hold on. I'm sorry.
No, it's not. It happens.
Okay,
no,
this is actually, you know, and also, you know, you're engaging in revisionist history here, and so I just want to push back on that. You said JFK was attacking Nixon during the debates for Nixon supporting the 90% tax rate. And yes, you're right. JFK said that he wants to lower the top tax rate to 74%. He said people like me don't pay, you know, 90%. But we do pay 74%. And let's close the loopholes. But what he was calling for was an increase in federal government revenue. He wanted to actually increase the amount of taxes that rich people paid. And that was the effect of the 1964 drop from 90% to 74%, was that federal revenues came up. Whereas, you know, during many of these other tax breaks, like when George W. Bush cut the taxes, you know, federal revenues went down. And here's Jack Kennedy saying to Richard Nixon, stop mischaracterizing me, which is what you were just doing, which is what conservatives continue to do. Let me just play a real quick clip for you of this. And you know, this is Jack Kennedy in the debate.
It's possible to gain a $700 million to $1 billion.
That's added taxes.
Changes, which I believe would close up loopholes on dividend withholding, on expense accounts.
So he wants to do away with dividend withholding, and then he continues.
We would spend more money in this administration on aid to education. We'd spend more money on housing. We'd spend more money, and I hope more wisely, on defense than this administration has done. Mr. Nixon misstates my figures constantly, which is, of course, his right. But the fact of the matter is, here is where I stand, and I just want to have it on the public record.
So, you know, it just makes me crazy every time I hear some Republican come on and say, oh, Jack Kennedy wanted to cut taxes on rich people. No, he wanted to raise taxes on rich people, and he wanted to increase spending. And he did both.
No, he wanted
to... Well, actually, LBJ did both.
He wanted to decrease taxes and raise revenue, which is exactly what Ronald Reagan did when he cut taxes as well.
No.
He cut taxes.
No, not even close. Reagan did not close loopholes. He cut taxes on rich people. He raised taxes 18 times on average working people.
He cut taxes and revenue went up. That's exactly what
Kennedy closed loopholes or wanted to. Like I said, LBJ did it. It was in '64, and closed loopholes and campaigned on, I'm going to raise the taxes of rich people. They are going to pay more money. Now, if what you're saying is that, you know, closing loopholes would be a good thing because rich people should pay more taxes, fine, I agree with you. But, you know, at a 39% tax rate?
What I am saying to you is both things can be true. JFK could have sat there and said, I want to close loopholes and cut taxes. And Ronald Reagan could have said, I want to cut taxes, and revenue to the federal government went up in both those scenarios.
But JFK did not want to cut taxes. He wanted to lower the tax rate.
You just made my case. He did cut taxes to 74%.
He refused to call it a tax cut. He referred to it as tax changes. Listen one more time, where he says we're gonna raise more revenue.
I think it's possible to gain a $700 million to $1 billion through tax changes.
He called it tax changes. Closing, he refused to use that phrase, tax cuts, because it wasn't a tax cut. It was a tax increase.
when numbers go down, it's usually referred to as a cut. But that's besides the point. Also, what I want to refer to back into the 1950s and 1960s, which you were talking about, was during that time period, there was also heavy tariffs on imports. So it encouraged Americans to buy domestically and to hire domestically. There was no H-1B visa fraud, which created more job growth. There was no H-2 visa fraud, which created more low-skilled job growth. And I think that those things, along with Jack Kennedy's tax cuts, tax changes, I won't make you have a spasm right now, tax changes, help spur growth, especially when we had so many workers coming home from.
So if you're agreeing with me that a 74% tax rate and closing loopholes on millionaires and billionaires is going to enhance growth, why aren't you calling for it?
No, I don't think that would be the number one way to enhance growth. I think the most important thing that we could do right now as Americans to enhance the economy and to get Americans hired, because really that's what you want to do, improve standards of living for Americans, improve wages for Americans, and get more Americans hired. I think what we do have to do is go after businesses for H-1B and H-2B visa fraud.
You're talking fewer than 1 million jobs there. I don't disagree with you. And I completely agree with you on trade, which is interesting because that's classically a Democratic Party position. Every single free trade deal was passed through Congress with a majority Republican in the House, majority Republican support in the Senate, majority Democratic opposition in the House, majority Democratic opposition in the Senate. The Democratic Party never supported, as a majority of the Democratic Party never supported any of these trade deals. Yes, Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, but he was the outlier. So, it's great to hear you take the position of the Democratic Party. And, and when Donald Trump did that in the primary, that's when I said on this program, the guy's going to win the Republican primary because he's running as a Democrat.
Well, I was a Democrat at one point, and I consider myself an independent thinker. But yes, I think that things like the Korean Free Trade Agreement, which Barack Obama reauthorized, and I mean, I don't remember Barack Obama not canceling. Barack Obama was for TPP, so I don't think that is a naturally R versus D thing. I do think that it's
his party was not with him on it.
Okay,
the Democratic Party.
The nominee was with him on it, but the point is, I'm not here to sit there and fight R versus D. I'm here to sit there and talk about, which is, I'm thanking you, by the way, for being one of the very few shows not to sit there and spend every waking, breathing minute talking about Russia and actually about solutions that will help average Americans. I do think that we need to reanalyze the way we do trade, H-1B reform, and education more than taxes.
Okay, all right, Ryan. Thank you for your thoughts. Thanks for dropping by. Ryan Girdusky, hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Ryan is the senior writer at Red Alert Politics. RedAlertPolitics.com is the website. You can tweet him at Ryan, Girdusky. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.